Hello everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, on today's news, let's talk about the state of The Last of Us. Apparently a whole bunch of leaks doing the rounds. One coming from known leaker Daniel Reitman, Daniel RPK, usually associated with various film leaks, Hollywood stuff, things like that, mentioning on a Patreon post that Naughty Dog are looking to cast 5 characters for an upcoming Last of Us project, those being Lucas, Mason, Val, Ezra, and Gracie, or Graces, Gracis. One of the two. Apparently the story features all 5 of them held up in a Victorian house on the outskirts of a city as Vezra looks to take over the house from Val. Now, various outlets are reporting that this isn't relating to Last of Us Part 3, but instead The Last of Us Factions, the story portion of The Last of Us multiplayer mode, because that makes a whole lot more sense in terms of, having 5 main characters or whatever.
Yeah.
And so The Last of Us 3 is still separate, according to another leaker, Viewer Anon, saying that Part 3 still features Ellie and that major filming is happening later this year. Thoughts on either, my friend?
Let's jump into The Last of Us Factions, because
Yes.
that's been the big question mark over this year, at least in terms of Sony's output and what they haven't actually announced yet. Because, The Last of Us Factions has been in development for a long time now, and we all expected it at their showcase, and then a few weeks afterwards, it was announced that it had this big delay, and Jason Schreier had a report out saying that things had been scaled back because they showed it to Bungie, essentially Sony's live service, brains. That's why they bought them, to figure out how to make their live services games work, and they looked at The Last of Us Factions and said, we're not sure about this, we're not sure about that. But in spite of all that, I'm still looking forward to it, man. I could really take a Last of Us multiplayer game, because I loved The Last of Us Factions that was attached to The Last of Us 1 so much. I thought that had such a great concept of going out and playing death matches and other game modes and bringing back resources. And to me, this idea of having a home base and having 5 characters within that base is a perfect framing point for that style of gameplay, going out, competing in these matches, and bringing stuff back and seeing what's changed when you do return home. How is the power struggle shifted? What's happened when you've been gone?
Does that, that's the thing. It's how do you make a Last of Us game that is story heavy, that it works as a Naughty Dog story game, but also as a live service game that can go on for maybe years at a time? That was assumedly what was part of the Bungie thing behind closed doors when they evaluated whatever plans Naughty Dog had for the future of the game overall. And apparently a lot of that needed overhauling or tweaking or whatever it is. But the idea that they have this vague outline of Ezra wants to take the house away from Val, I wonder whether that makes the 2 different factions in general.
Yeah.
And that would give you an excuse for one to fight the other or something. I don't know why they would be crossing over in just one house when there's a ton of houses. And the Insider Gaming report mentions it's an apocalypse, there's plenty houses, Ezra. You could go somewhere else.
Hey, not safe houses. I've seen a lot of
bad houses.
A lot of bad houses in the Last of Us franchise get completely ransacked. And that's why in The Last of Us Part 2, Ellie's farmhouse is so special, because it's nice and it's separated and there's not a lot of threats around. So I would say that the real estate issue is a problem in The Last of Us world. I have been through Seattle. It's not great.
That's true. Music's good. Yeah. But in regards to this thing, where do you come down on that split of story versus multiplayer stuff? I don't necessarily need the story stuff. I just don't have any belief in it yet. I need to be convinced that they can do a worthwhile, meaty Naughty Dog, Uncharted / Last of Us, the mature era of Naughty Dog style story. And I don't know how you pair that with multiplayer and emotes and loot and all that kind of stuff.
No, nor do I. I don't need the pretense of a story to look forward to a Last of Us multiplayer experience. And every time a multiplayer game has come out that said, don't worry, we've got this story that we're threading throughout. I think of Titanfall as the biggest offender on this list.
Yeah, the original.
The original Titanfall, where it was just okay, but this isn't why people are here. It's not that compelling. That said, I keep going back to The Last of Us Factions, the things that happened in between the matches in that game were interesting, but they were told through text. So you would come back and your, camp had been attacked. You would come back and your people were starving. You would come back and people had died. If you can visualize those story beats and make them cinematic, make them cutscenes, show us rather than tell us what's happened while you've been away, I'm in, because those were compelling twists and turns, and it made the tension of going out and needing to get those resources feel real, because you had people back home that were, banking
That could be
on
really
you
good.
returning.
Yeah, that kind of makes you think of like the State of Decay games, where you're always bringing all your resources back to this one place, and almost also I'm just having all the thoughts now, kind of like Metal Gear Solid 5's mother-based stuff as well.
Yeah.
Maybe you can go into the other person's base and like ransack it or something. I know that they've said that all 5 characters are vying for this old Victorian house overall, but it feels like things like that would make a lot more sense, where there's like a narrative backbone to it, as opposed to stopping everything and making everybody watch a cutscene.
Well, we don't know what form it's going to take, but a lot of the rumors said that it's going to be like either a battle royale style game or an extraction shooter based game. And I think the extraction shooter based gameplay would lend itself well to these story missions and beats, because it's a blend of PvP and PvE. So you could have a mission where, someone's attacked your camp, say, and you need to go and get revenge. They're out there in like the multiplayer game world. So I think it would make for an interesting mission where you go out, they're your main objective, you need to find them. But along the way, obviously, you have other players in that world who are also going to be doing their own missions, and you might come into contact with them, and it's about completing the mission you're on, not getting killed by other players, and then making it back in one piece. That's where I think that kind of extraction framework would work really well for this kind of game, but that's just me.
No, I agree. I thought that was like the best part of the Division. Like that one part in the middle of the map where it suddenly became like a crossover live multiplayer thing and everyone's shooting each other, and there were extraction elements to some of the goals that you were doing in there. I had the best time in the Division when it was all that you could see the package and you knew everyone was trying to converge on this one place, and then just who makes it out with it. And I get that there is a bit of a rise of extraction shooters at the minute. Obviously, there's the likes of Hunt Showdown. There's the Marathon game that's coming out from Bungie themselves, seems to be an extraction shooter as well. So maybe this is the thing that they're going to be steering into. Speaking of steering into things, Last of Us 3. What do you want to see from it? Assumedly Ellie is the main character. I wonder if it is an Ellie story, and I'm hoping this is like you make it the trilogy, the Ellie trilogy, where you've got the Joel part of her life, you've got the Dina part of her life, and the Abby part of her life, and then whatever happens at the end. And hopefully we get some sort of decent resolution to that.
I hope so. I think it's got to be Ellie's story. Even The Last of Us Part 1, even though you were playing as Joel, it is Ellie's story ultimately. Naughty Dog have said that's the case, especially picking up with her in Part 2, and I just think it makes sense to finish her narrative in a third game, because while The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't, like Last of Us Part 1, funnily enough, doesn't necessarily need a continuation. It's not like it ends on a big cliffhanger, in my opinion. Like, you can just end it there and then everyone can imagine what comes next for Ellie. It would be an incredibly depressing series of scenarios that you can probably imagine, but nonetheless, I feel like you can then pick up from there, maybe have another time jump, maybe another 5 years, and then kind of, wrap it back up and maybe give Ellie a happier ending if you think she deserves one.
I'm curious what they do with Ellie at this point, because obviously she had so many demons across Last of Us Part 2 that were very much big from Last of Us Part 1, even the ability to like not really fully settle in Jackson because she knew bits and pieces about what Joel was saying was a lie. They had to explore all of that stuff. I feel like by the end of 2 it is this big sort of knockdown, drag out approach to that story, and you've answered every single thing, and obviously by the very end of it, it is just her left in isolation, having suffered various wounds, and can she rebuild her family and things like that. Because it almost has that blank slate feel, I wonder what the hell you even do for Last of Us Part 3.
Yeah.
I don't really want to see more Ellie and Abby stuff. I like the fact that Abby and Lev just left at the end of Part 2.
Yeah.
I can just assume that they're happy. I don't need more from them.
That's it, man. I don't know where I fall on that myself, because I love Abby and Lev as characters. But I do kind of like what you mentioned there of having each chapter in Ellie's life be kind of revolving around like a new cast, and having maybe Joel is the through line, someone she's still learning from, someone she still obviously thinks about, someone she's still obviously like really grieving. But I don't know what they're going to do with Abby and Lev, because by the end of Part 2, they go off to try and find the Fireflies, and it seems like they're probably successful in that. But then do the Fireflies play in their, rebuilding, play a more prominent role in Part 3, and is Ellie trying to atone for past mistakes? I don't know. They could weave it like that, but I'm kind of happy with Abby and Lev having something of a bittersweet ending where they go through hell in The Last of Us Part 2, but they reach their destination.
I'm just going to hope that they're both fine. I think that I was talking to my wife about this, and she was saying, why not have Ellie almost become the Joel role, like going forward? Maybe she helps someone else. Maybe she sort of imparts a bunch of wisdom herself. Give her a green shirt. Let her carry forward the legacy beauty of the green shirt. Either way, I feel like overall for The Last of Us, it's become this much bigger thing. There's The Last of Us TV show that did really, really well then towards the start of the year, and at some point, with Naughty Dog being the tip of the spear for all this stuff, they must have to have various story plot points written out in case the show needs to tap into those things.
Yeah.
And maybe make it feel more like a trilogy overall or a set of seasons overall. The Last of Us as a story, as Ellie's story, assumedly is going towards some specific thing, but it's going to hit that across games and TV at the same time.
I love The Last of Us, but I'd love it to end after the third game. And with that in mind, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'd prefer Naughty Dog to focus on part 3 and close that chapter of their history as developers and then move on to a new IP rather than drop a new IP now and have another 4 or 5 years before we get the ending to The Last of Us as a whole. Whether they'll do that, I don't know. I don't know what they've been working on internally, but if they're maybe shooting stuff for The Last of Us Part 3 this year, does that mean it's going to be their next project? Are they juggling a few things at the same time? I'm not entirely sure. I don't know what you think about that.
I like the idea of them. I mean, you know me, I'm always going to want something else, so I want the new stuff. I like the idea that they, in between Last of Us 1 and 2, they did Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy, so I kind of hope that they do something else in between. Hopefully the new IP. There's been a new IP rumored for a while. At some point it was a medieval game, and then it was a sci-fi game. I would like to see a new idea from Naughty Dog and not overextend their previous IPs.
Well, this is the thing, man. Like, I also agree with that, but that's kind of why I want them to hold off on the new IP for a little bit, because I love this franchise. Last of Us Part 2 is one of my favorite games ever, as is The Last of Us Part 1. But I don't know if I could imagine a reality where the PS6 is coming out and we're getting The Last of Us Part 3 then. I almost kind of want to close this chapter like they did with Uncharted in the current generation. Then you've already spanned the trilogy across 3 generations of consoles and then move on and then you properly start the next chapter. I don't know, that's just me.
The idea of we're not getting the next one until the PS6 when we're only into the 3rd year of the PS5 is kind of melting my little head. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below. Check this Last of Us video out right here. And I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.